So in 2.4, we're going to take everything we learned from 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and we're going to put it together and talk about what happens if our supply or our demand curve shifts after we're already in our equilibrium. So here's what's going to happen. Those shifts that we had talked about, biceps or spites, if one of those occurs, what we will see is a shift of our demand or a shift of our supply, and we will end up with a new equilibrium with a new equilibrium price and a new equilibrium quantity. So we're going to be drawing a lot of graphs today, have those straight edges ready, and I want to explain to you exactly what happens here. Now, before we go any further, I also want you to know this is something that you do not need to memorize. And what I mean by that is, as long as you understand the concepts of how to draw shifts of supply and demand, you never have to memorize what's going to happen to the equilibrium. As long as you can draw it out, you can look at the graph and understand what's going on. So let's first start with a shift of our demand curve. Let's say with an increase in demand, a shift to the right of our demand curve. Now, you're also going to notice I have a little table there at the bottom left. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But if we have an increase in demand, a shift to the right. So if you notice, we moved from our D1 to D2. And now we have a new point where our demand curve intersects with our supply curve. We had it before at E1, and now it's up there at E2. So if you notice, we had an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity, P1 and Q1, that we had originally started with. But at this new equilibrium, what can we say has happened to our price and what can we say has happened to our quantity? Well, as the demand increases, more people want to buy something, we're going to see two things happen at once. First and foremost, if you notice, our price has increased. At our new equilibrium, our price moves up from P1 up to P2. But at the same time, if we line up our new equilibrium with our quantity axis, we notice that the quantity has also increased. We see that now at this new equilibrium, more of that product is being supplied and demanded. And so the quantity increases there. So if we have an increase in demand, a shift to the right, we'll notice that our new equilibrium has a price increase and a quantity increase. And this should make sense. Whenever people want more of something and there's more demand for it, more people want to buy it, it's going to drive the price up, right? Like you guys saw this in COVID when there was like a mad rush for like toilet paper and hand sanitizer and all this stuff. Not only were companies trying to supply or make more, but the price of that stuff was going up. So in that table, what I want us to do is I want us to note what happens to our equilibrium price and quantity when demand increases. So if you notice, we're just going to draw an up arrow for price and an up arrow for quantity. We're going to come back to that later, don't worry. Now, what happens if we see a decrease in the demand curve or a shift back to the left? Now, all of a sudden, fewer people want to buy this product at every single price. What's that going to do to our equilibrium or that happy point where our supply and demand intersect? Well, whenever we have this shift to the left, let's line up our new equilibrium with our axes. And so we now have P2 and Q2. If you notice, whenever our demand decreases, the price falls, the price goes down. And so in our new equilibrium, we see the price has decreased. At the same time, we notice that our quantity has also decreased, meaning the total amount that people want to either buy or is being supplied has decreased too. And this makes sense. Think about what happens whenever the demand for winter coats goes down as it gets closer to summer. What do companies have to do to the price? Well, they have to lower it. They have to put it on sale because demand has fallen. And so what we end up seeing is they have to drop the price in order to get rid of all of their supply, to get rid of all that quantity that they've made. Because if they had kept selling it at a higher price, they would have a surplus. They would have a bunch left over. So they have to lower the price to our equilibrium in order to clear the market of all of those winter coats. So whenever we have a decrease in demand, what we notice is that our equilibrium price decreases and our equilibrium quantity decreases. Now, what happens if we have a shift of our supply? What happens if all of a sudden there's an increase in supply or more of every single product is being made available? So we have a shift to the right of our supply curve. Well, one thing that we know is as there's more supply, as there's more competitors, that's actually going to drive our price down. And that's not only something we know intuitively, like we know that not only as there's more of something available, typically it gets cheaper, but we also can see that as we graph it in this supply and demand model. So the price falls from P1 to P2 at our new equilibrium, right? So at our new equilibrium, the price has decreased, but what happens to our quantity? Well, whenever there's more of something available, In order to get rid of it all, they have to lower the price, but there's also more of it available. And so we notice that we have a quantity increase from E1 to E2. And so again, all we're doing here is we're lining up our equilibriums from our first one and then lining up our second one and trying to understand what happens along each axis, what happens to the price and what happens to the quantity. And so again, filling out our little table, we're going to make sure that we note that whenever the supply increases, the price drops and the quantity increases. So price goes down, quantity goes up. And then finally, what happens if there is a shift to the left of our supply curve? And so maybe this is something that you guys had seen if you did those practice problems where we talked about the supply of avocado. So if there was really bad weather back with Hurricane Irma, and there was a decrease in supply of avocados because a lot of the avocados were destroyed. Well, what ended up happening is that the price of avocados had to rise. There's now less of those avocados available, and because of that, there's more like competition between demanders in order to get it. And what that does is it drives the price up. If we had kept the price that low before, if we kept the price at P1, there'd be a shortage of avocados. And so what we end up seeing is that the price naturally moves to this new equilibrium, and we have a new price, a higher price. And so at our new equilibrium, as there's a decrease in supply, it drives the price up. You guys know this, like whenever there's something that's like a collectible or something that's really rare, whenever it's in very small supply, the price of it's super expensive, right? That's why collectibles are so expensive, because the supply of it is so low. At the same time, what we would notice is that the quantity decreases. There's now less of it available. Like we said with the avocado example, if avocado crops are destroyed, the quantity of avocados at our equilibrium is going to be less just because there's fewer avocados available, and they're all going to be more expensive too because there's less of them available. And so what we end up seeing is that the price will increase and the quantity will decrease. Like I said, we're going to come back and revisit this table as we explore what happens when there is a double shift.